Attention Veridian Galleria customers.
Some places are abandoned for a reason. The Veridian Galleria had been empty for years. No shoppers, no employees, no electricity. But after sunset, something changed. Dylan Reeves thought he knew the rules of exploring a dead mall. He had spent years documenting forgotten places like this one. But today, the familiar halls began to feel different. An old intercom crackled to life. The darkness seemed to stretch deeper with every step. And somewhere inside the abandoned Galleria, something was waiting. Dylan came looking for a story. He may have found something that was never meant to be disturbed. Because there are some places you should never enter after the sun goes down. This is 9 Lives of Fear.
It's not the cold seeping into my bones that is the problem. Not entirely anyway, though of course the white K-esque temperature drop inside the Veridian Galleria may have had a role to play. It's 2026 and I am still an aficionado, a historian of the dying. The glass cathedrals that decay from the bottom up, relics of gluttony that consumed itself, they're my sustenance. I am Dylan Reeves and I document the magnificent death. I had vivid memories of the Veridian Galleria from my days as a child. Such a lively, thriving creature it had been, full of energy, full of life, the aisles resounding with the noise and chatter of people, the food court filled with the clatter and clang of trays. It now had none of that, and yet, surprisingly, it was still oddly lovely. The skylights that once blazed with sunlight onto the glistening marble floor now let through only a dull daylight, reflecting off sagging ceiling tiles and stagnant pools of standing water. The retail outlets emptied of their contents sat like withered husks, mouths agape in a silent scream. Leaky fixtures had let rust spread like a plague of red across the flaking beige paintwork. In the era of dead mall tourism, I was one of many who flocked to places like Veridian. Explorers like me searched for the aesthetic of the in-between, that peaceful space where the electric hue of faded neon cast a glow over spider-webbed walls, where planters once carefully manicured were overrun by weeds pushing up through the tile to reach the beams above. It was a language of paradox, civilization crumbling into nature, man losing his grip. It was a haunting dream glimpsed in daylight. The building's silence settled over everything god-awful and absolute. The occasional scratch of a rat's claws through the hallways, the quick flutter of a bird that had found its way inside. The knowledge that these small, living things existed was oddly reassuring. I had spent my afternoons here in the deep, dim shopping mall, photographing the cracked paint of the abandoned carousel and the lost magnificence of the empty, sunken fountain in the main atrium. I loved the feeling of stepping backward into the memory of my not-so-distant childhood. The stale air seemed thick with ghosts of popcorn, the click of elevator buttons, the smell of new electronics. Yet I'd learned that the ease I felt here only lasted as long as the sun stayed high enough to lead me back outside. Today, though, I had a different plan. My online neighborhood retail RIP was all about testing the limits. The most coveted achievement, the one everyone whispered about in awe, was staying past closing and enduring the disturbing hush that fell after the shoppers left. I had always dismissed the media reports and the urban myths. I was a pro, I knew the proper procedures. Or so I thought. The sun was sinking behind the horizon, tinging the clouds pink and purple, burning boldly against the fading light. It wasn't long before I noticed the changes, delicate at first, then creeping over the cavernous spaces built to hold thousands. They weren't empty space anymore. Soon, they felt hungry. I noticed I sounded different now. My boots clomped and echoed as I walked past the glassless windows lining the storefronts, the sound ringing through the empty halls. I made my way across the food court. Where there had once been a bustling marketplace, the beating heart of the complex, there was now an uncanny valley rendered in architecture. The tables and chairs, desecrated remnants of once lively chatter, sat stacked and inverted, coated in a layer of dust and grime like fresh sediment. The last menu boards, frozen mid-display for Burger Kingdom and Fryrama, seemed to glare down at me. These were spaces built to communicate with human beings, and now, living without them, they'd taken on a predatory quality. The architecture had always been designed to disorient, just enough that shoppers would linger, spend, buy things they didn't need, and that same design now felt like a trap. Walk through the front doors and every corridor seemed to stretch on forever, opening onto wing after wing, each one dimmer and grayer than the last, until the whole place felt like something built to swallow you whole. My practiced eye, ever ready to conjure an escape route, was beginning to falter. The familiar sights I'd memorized earlier in the day, the gutted entrance of the department store, the damp, sooty mural at the entryway to the old cinema, seemed to morph in the growing gloom. I knew they hadn't moved, yet they suddenly felt alien. The emptiness that had earlier seemed to set me free now felt like the slide of a gaping maw, ready to devour me. The air seemed to chill further. The smell of rot and damp cement and mildew was tinged with something sharp and metallic. I reassured myself it was just my perception, my rational mind playing tricks in the shadowy dark. But my stomach clenched and I could feel panic nibbling away at my control. I'd heard the rumors, posts on the retail RIP forum about how a mall's internal logic could shift after sunset. I'd shrugged them off as hyperbole, another overeager rookie spooking themselves. Now I wish I hadn't. I was making my way across the empty central atrium, my headlamp casting a halo around me when it happened. A voice, jumbled, muddled, like white noise trying and failing to parse itself, drifted from somewhere I couldn't see.
Attention, Veridian Galleria customers. The mall is now closing. Please proceed to the nearest exit.
It was a phantom announcement, a scream of a voice from the past. But it was real, and it was meant for me. The blood in my body pounded against my ribs like a frantic drum solo, echoing through the silent night. I whirled around, torch raised, searching for anyone. There was no one. The voice merged with the building's own groans and creaks, and all I could do was stand there and shake. A few minutes into the darkest wing I'd found yet, a disturbing whir suddenly broke the silence. It started near its source, then traveled down the empty passage. The escalator slowly was starting up. Steps smeared with years of dust began to turn over. Unpowered, impossible. Lazily at first, then faster, teeth grinding and clanging as they carried unseen passengers higher and higher. I froze, motion activated. No way, there was no power, there was no motion. I held my breath, headlamp trained on the arc-like contraption as it climbed, then paused as suddenly as it had started. All I could hear was the ringing in my ears. This wasn't just disrepair or creepiness. Something here was wrong with the fabric of reality itself. Was there a secret power source, some faulty, long-disused piece of infrastructure sparking to life, or was the shopping mall really changing? Whispers of structural instability had scared people before, sure, but that was supposed to be normal. Everything settled and shifted and moaned and screeched and clanged and banged and growled and sank, and I didn't know whether the mall was calming down or waking up. My mind raced back to recent reports of other explorers encountering modified security drones, scavenged, repurposed, or worse, still patrolling the dead zones after dark. I hadn't seen one yet, but the idea of some outmoded security system, blind and unshakable as a predator, hunting me here in the dark only fed my rising panic. My thermal monocle again failed to find any sign of life, human or otherwise, against the black metal shell of the Veridian. All I saw were tangled heat signatures bleeding off broken down piles of metal, nothing that told me what else was out there. I knew I could die here. I groped for my comms unit, anything, anyone that would let me voice the cold, numbing terror anchoring itself in my stomach. But the mall's metal ribs were insurmountable, a Faraday cage killing the signal before it could ever leave the building. My frantic mayday was met with only a ringing silence. Panic, a cold and squeezing hand around my throat, making my whole arsenal of urban exploration skills feel almost useless. Tools I relied on to navigate sites with poor visibility. A high-lumen headlamp, a thermal monocle, Kevlar gloves, each suddenly seemed like little more than toys. I had a basic first aid kit, a multi-tool, a portable power bank I always carried, and a tiny high-frequency sound emitter to keep the rats away. Against whatever this was, it was laughably sparse. My mind scrambled to remember every survival tip I'd ever picked up over the years. Plan a way out. That was all that mattered now. But whichever way I chose, I found myself deeper in an increasingly complex maze. The main atrium, where I'd entered hours ago, felt miles away now, lost somewhere behind a labyrinth of dark corridors and collapsed shopfronts. My digital map, heavily annotated, saved on an encrypted drive I always carried, was useless. The building seemed to hate GPS signals, but even without that, the mall's internal logic seemed to be shifting, stairwells appearing where there'd been none before, once familiar crossroads now ending in dead walls. I tried to track faint drafts of air, hoping they'd lead me to a loading dock or a fire escape. But the bitter air was dead and still, swirling lazily in random little whirlpools that led nowhere. I pressed myself against a damp, graying wall and tried to steady my panicked breathing and racing mind. Don't run, running disorients. Listen, watch. But what was there to observe that wasn't frightening? Two piercing points of light appeared in the darkness, deep in a wing I had yet to explore. I felt a childlike urge to turn and run back the way I'd come, but something else in me fought against it. There was no going back now. I remembered the law written not on any forum, but passed down by explorers who'd learned it the hard way. Once the sun goes down, there are some passageways you never cross. But the light, it was a sickly, pulsing green, unliving, like a roadside emergency light gone dim and hypnotic. It called to me, the only star of man-made light in an ocean of black. Was it a real exit or a more sophisticated trap? I was trembling as I raised the headlamp again, the beam flickering over the long, empty hallway. The ghostly announcement came again, louder this time, more distinct.
Veridian Galleria closing. You're not allowed after hours.
My chest went tight. It wasn't just a recording. There was a difference, a dreadful sluggishness to the words, as if they were being articulated to me. I wanted to scream, to pound on the rotting walls, but I couldn't. Any sound I made would echo through this chamber of concrete, calling down whatever creature, whatever force was rising from the heart of the Galleria. I retreated from the green glow, from the absurd escalator, from the voice-shaped emptiness. All I wanted was to leave, whatever it took. I didn't care about the video, the story, the retail RIP bragging rights. I wanted city lights, city noise, the world. But the moment I turned, I knew I was lost. The mall had swallowed my sense of direction the same way it had swallowed everything else that dared stay past closing, caught in its terminal fangs. My headlamp flickered off on the battery that had been full an hour ago, now inexplicably drained. Darkness grew and expanded around me, winding thick, stifling coils into my mind. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural scraping from somewhere behind a mound of debris near a loading dock. A low growl that came from no beast and no machine, but from something long departed. I finally got it, the mall. You should never go to a dead mall after dark. Once the sun sets on the golden age of retail, when the lights finally go out, you're not investigating a dead mall anymore. You're trapped inside a living mausoleum. The concrete maze has a night crew, and it was just getting started. And my camera was still recording.
Maybe abandoned places aren't truly empty. Maybe when we leave behind the places we once filled with laughter, noise, and life, something else eventually moves in. Dylan entered the Veridian Galleria looking for a glimpse of the past. Instead, he discovered that some places don't simply die, they wait. And perhaps the most frightening thing about the mall wasn't what was hiding inside it, but the possibility that it had been waiting for someone to stay after dark. So if you ever find yourself standing outside an abandoned mall as the sun begins to disappear, remember, some doors are better left closed, and some places are better left in the dark. Because when the lights go out, you may not be alone. You've survived another tale from 9 lives of fear, but don't get comfortable. If the shadows whispered to you tonight, hit like before they whisper again. Share this video with someone who thinks they're brave. Let's see how long their courage lasts. And subscribe, because around here, every click feeds the darkness, and the darkness remembers. Where the shadows linger long after the story ends. Stay scared.
Attention Veridian Galleria customers. The mall is now closing. Please remain where you are.